From HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman, hosted by Carl Franklin. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 88, recorded live Wednesday, November 7th, 2007. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik R80 Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows forums and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. Support is also provided by .NET Developers Journal, the world's leading .NET developer magazine. Online at www.sys-con.com. In this episode, Scott talks with Mel Sampat, a program manager at Microsoft who's written an application that syncs faces between Outlook, Windows Mobile, and Facebook.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we are sitting here today with Mel Sampat, a program manager on the Windows Mobile team. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today, Mel. Now, you have an application that I just recently installed on my machine called Outsync, and this is something that talks to Facebook, it talks to Outlook, and it makes my mobile phone better. So it's really kind of I felt that it was a pretty complicated thing because it touched lots of aspects of my lives. It reached into Facebook, it reached into Outlook, it reached into mobile. Tell me about this application, what this does.
Sure. Hey, Scott. So this application is called Outsync, and what it does is essentially take the photos of the people that you know on Facebook that you also have as contacts within your Outlook application. And it takes those photos and syncs them and inserts them into your Outlook contacts. And if you've got a Windows Mobile device that syncs up with Outlook, whether it's over ActiveSync or over the Exchange server, those photos sync up with Windows Mobile, with your Windows Mobile device. So for the contacts that you have in both places, on Facebook as well as Outlook, you would ultimately see those photos on your phone. And most of the stuff happens, the actual sync of those photos happens automatically. So you get those photos into your phone, and then when those people call you, you see those photos in your caller ID, and every time you open them up in your contacts app on your phone.
So it seems like a pretty straightforward thing, but there's a lot going on underneath the covers here. But for me as a user, basically I ran this little app. I logged it into my Facebook account. Somehow I told it about Facebook. Right? I authorized it as an application in Facebook.
Correct. Yes, you have to do that. You have to give the application permission to access your Facebook information.
So, of course, Facebook, for those of you who aren't on Facebook, and if you're not on Facebook, why not, is an application. It's a social networking application. It's kind of a portal, like it's a friendlier version of LinkedIn or Orkut or one of these social networking sites. And it's surprisingly addictive. And now I've got about 2,100 Outlook contacts. Just every time I meet somebody, every time I get a business card, I come back from a convention, I enter it in. So I'm obsessive about this. And then I've got, some couple of thousand friends on Facebook. And every one of those friends has a face associated with them. So you're doing an intersection of those two sets of data.
Correct. Now, the nice thing about Facebook is most people that have a profile on there usually have a photo. Some people, when they get started with Facebook, they don't have a picture there for privacy reasons, but eventually they notice that most of their friends have a photo and they just put a picture out there. So wouldn't it be nice if you could grab the latest and greatest picture that the person chose for himself or herself, and then get that into your Outlook contacts with the people that you have in both places? That's essentially what Outsync is meant to do.
And Outsync's not an Outlook add-in, because I know that I've got lots and lots of Outlook add-ins, and I'm, interestingly enough, not really willing to add any more. I feel like I'm maybe destabilizing Outlook a bit. This is something that I just run occasionally. I maybe run it twice in the last month.
Correct. Now, that's interesting that you brought that up, because when I first started thinking about how I would present the UI for Outsync, my first instinct was to create it as an Outlook plugin or add-in, so it would be like a toolbar button that you could just start from within Outlook. But my concern was what you just mentioned, which is people wouldn't want to do this every single day just because people's friends don't change their photos on Facebook every single day. So it just didn't make sense to load it within the space of Outlook itself. And, maybe you run it once a week and you just run it on demand and it doesn't take up any memory while you're not using it.
So walk me through the creation of this. You sit down, you'll file a new application, and just walk me through what the thought process was.
Sure. So it requires so obviously there is a bunch of platforms here, right? One is you're programming against the Facebook APIs. Second, you're programming with Outlook itself. And third, this is a desktop application, so it could be written in managed code or native code, or, I had to make a few decisions there. And ultimately, the goal is that it brings all this information to your mobile phone. But strangely enough, this application has no pieces running on the phone itself. The transport of the photos from Outlook to your mobile phone happens over Exchange or ActiveSync.
Because you've always been able to add pictures to contacts.
Correct.
Right? I know people who obsessively take photographs of the people in their contacts lists, but it seemed to me that if I can't go running these 2,000 people down.
Yeah.
If the photos are out there, we should exploit those.
Yep. Yeah. So the way I started this was first, I would obviously need access to, the Facebook information itself. My first instinct was, before I found out that, Facebook supports all of these APIs, I thought, well, maybe I could screen scrape information from people's Facebook profiles as long as the user gives me his name and password. But that just seemed very, intrusive, and it didn't seem like an elegant way to do it. So, I always knew that Facebook has an API. I just didn't know how hard it was to use, and if it was all open source, PHP, stuff which I really wasn't very comfortable with. I was more comfortable with with managed code using the .NET framework. So I dug around a little bit on Facebook's developer site, and I found all their REST APIs and Ajax like code. It didn't really seem very familiar to me. So, I started poking around to see if anyone's written a managed wrapper for the REST APIs that Facebook exposes. And oddly enough, Microsoft has, a library for Facebook, which is hosted on Codeplex, which is our open source, website.
So this is a part of the, if I remember correctly, this is part of the Coding for Fun guys.
So it started as an MSDN Coding for Fun project, but it evolved, and now it's actually hosted on Codeplex. So it's open source, and a company, I forget the name of the company that Microsoft hired to do this work, but there was this third-party vendor who actually went and created this whole framework for Microsoft, and it's now hosted on Codeplex as an open source project. And the original MSDN Coding for Fun framework is still available, but the one on Codeplex is newer, and it's got more revisions, and it's got more bug fixes and a few more features. So
what does this API feel like? I'm thinking about if this is ultimately angle brackets, and when we usually say REST, the REST API, but there's REST in the classical sense. I think I'll do a show on REST in the future, but then there's what we usually call POCs, just plain old XML, which isn't a formalized thing. It's basically, I post something and something comes back. And most APIs that when we say REST, are actually underneath POCs. But when you wrap that in a managed API, you have to ask yourself, am I going to start holding state, or am I going to make it look like a request response? What does this API feel like, and how much does it give away what's going on underneath?
So essentially what happens is, I'm going to talk to it from the managed side, right? So you get the assemblies for, Facebook.dll and Facebook.web.dll. You get them into your solution, and then, you use them. And then, if you use a managed framework that Microsoft provides, you're essentially shielded from all of the underlying, REST APIs and XML. It goes back and forth between the server and your desktop application. What happens is you call a method within this Facebook class, which pops a login dialog, which, the UI for logging into Facebook is also embedded within the assembly itself.
Really? So as a desktop application developer, you have a control that you just drop into your form, and you Correct. Say, this is where authorization for this application is going to appear.
The control is part of this framework that you download from Codeplex. So you just drag and drop it, and you give it a few properties, such as your application ID, your author ID, your which you get by registering as a developer on Facebook's website.
Okay, so step 0, go to Facebook's developer website, register as a developer, and then indicate your intent to make an application.
Yes. And, and once you've done that, and that's free, anyone can do that, right? Any user can just mark themselves as a developer by adding the developer application to their profiles.
Oh, really?
So once you've done that, you then start adding applications to your profile. Every time you add a new application, Facebook gives you a unique GUID for the application and then a secret phrase for that application. So you take those two properties and you put them into this control that you dropped into your managed project.
It's just a property that you set on that
Just
control.
a property, correct. And obviously you can do it with code as well if you want to do it programmatically or if you want to do it, if you just want to type it into the inspector. And then you just call a method. You just, I think it's called login or authorize or something like that. And, you just call a method and then the UI appears if it needs to. And then, the cookie gets set on your machine. From within this UI, and the UI is essentially a embedded web browser.
So they're giving you a cookie rather than giving you some secret that you have to then be responsible for storing securely.
Correct. Now that's the case with desktop applications. All of this is very, very easy now. There is another type of Facebook application that you write, which is a web application, which is more traditional Facebook apps that you see in people's profiles, like
like movies,
the
movies
Flicksters and the Vampire Bites and the favorite cars, the favorite phones, that kind of stuff, right? Now, for an application like that, which is hosted on the web, you actually have to do some state management. You get a query string from Facebook, which contains your session key, and then you pass it around to the pages that you want to host on Facebook. But for a desktop application, all of that stuff is much simpler.
That's great. So you didn't have to have any shared secrets or anything. You said log me in, and they set a cookie, and if the cookie gets blown away, you're prompted to log in again.
Correct. Exactly. It's really, really easy. So once you're logged in, you can just start, querying, you can start calling methods on this Facebook, object that you have. You can say, get friends list. It gives you like an array of objects, which are, each of them is like a friend class, right? And then you can, it's all, they're just rich classes that you can start using. So there's a class called user, for example, and if you look at the properties for the class, you have, friends and name and birthday.
And they're handling the serialization, the deserialization for you.
Exactly.
This is something I'm definitely going to check out for my weekly source code series because, I'm always interested to see how much someone abstracts away the wire protocol. And it sounds like in this case, it's complete. You never debugged this. You never looked at the wire.
Yeah. As a .NET developer, you don't have to worry about what's going on beneath the surface. I mean, and it's really, really clean, right? I mean, me personally, I would never have attempted this kind of thing if I had to mess around with the REST APIs. And
that's a really interesting statement. I mean, I like, for example, I recently did some work, talking to a thing called Wasabi. It's an online financial services thing, and they have a REST API. And the first thing I did was I went looking for a managed API for it, and it didn't exist. So then I was like, well, how badly do I want to do this? Now, in this particular case, I wanted to do it badly, so I built a managed API on top of it. But it sounds to me like if they didn't have this managed API, you probably would have just said, well, maybe later.
Exactly. And, and especially since I would have to write all the exception handling myself and how to figure out, just if the bits got transferred correctly and what the XML schema is. And I just wouldn't want to do that. But with managed code, I mean, as I work for Microsoft, and a lot of people that listen to your show probably use .NET as their primary.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that that's probably their primary thing.
Yeah, and for people like that who are typically writing enterprise applications or just using .NET because they're familiar with it. I mean, this just makes it so much easier and brings this whole social networking element to what used to be like an enterprise tool. Anyway, so just going for a little ahead, so once a user is logged into my app, I know who the person's friends are, and each friend has properties like small image, large image, medium image, and that's the image which the user has submitted to Facebook on their profiles.
Okay.
So I have the URL for their images. Now I take that URL and I dump it in a local temp file.
Okay.
And then I log into Outlook using the Office PIAs.
Okay, the PIA means primary interop assembly, and these are, because Office ultimately is a COM automation, or what used to be called OLE automation.
Right.
PIAs are the kind of official, GACT way to talk to Outlook.
Yeah.
It's the managed API for Outlook.
Correct. And again, that's also really, really, really easy. I mean, if you've got the, Microsoft, what is that? Visual Studio for Office.
VSTO, Visual Studio Tools for Office.
Yeah. So VSTO gives you all the PIAs you need to talk to Outlook and Exchange and PowerPoint and Word.
So did you have to install anything, or did this just came with Visual Studio?
I believe it came installed just because I think I have the professional enterprise version of Visual Studio. So
I think Visual Studio 2008 includes all this stuff too off the bat. One thing I want to back up on briefly is that just issues of privacy. So I understand that when someone adds me as a friend on Facebook, I have a choice to show them either my profile or my limited profile. So I think that people who might be listening who are thinking about, well, gosh, my friends are now using this photo for maybe things I didn't expect them to. But you are able to give people access to or reject access to things like your photo, your phone number, and your email address.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sometimes, you'll start clicking around at your friends list, and you'll see people whose photo is invisible to you because you're not their friend. You're considered just an anonymous surfer. Mm-hmm. And this API respects all of that Facebook privacy control that a user would face. So this API doesn't give you, as a developer, any additional access to the user profile than you would have had as a user anyway.
That's good. That's to reiterate that the API doesn't give you any additional power that the user wouldn't ordinarily have.
And in fact, the API goes one step ahead. So Facebook itself does not expose a user's email address and certain information like phone numbers to the API.
Oh, really?
So as a user, if I'm your friend on Facebook, Scott, I can look at your email address,
mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And I can email you from Facebook.
Right.
But as a developer, I don't have access to your email address. And I think Facebook put that check there just to prevent someone from harvesting.
So even if someone authorized an application thinking it was not evil, and it was evil, it still wouldn't have access to these things.
Exactly. And these things, specifically, it's the email address. I don't know for sure if it blocks phone numbers too, but I think it's a couple of fields which mm-hmm. Facebook considers to be crucial and, to avoid spam and to avoid information leak. So people sometimes email me and say, well, I have these contacts on Facebook, which I don't have in Outlook. So can you create Outlook contacts from Facebook?
Yeah.
And the answer is I can't do that because all I have access to is a picture and the name and certain other information, which probably isn't very useful without the email address.
I see. So Facebook, from an API perspective, isn't a full, complete contact management application at this point.
Correct. And I think it's better that way because they're doing what they should.
It's a book of faces. I mean, I understand that. I think I have immediately one question though, which is how are you synchronizing this? I just assumed you were looking at email addresses. What happens if John Smith and John Smith appear in my Outlook and my Facebook, but it's a different guy?
Yeah, good question, Scott. So, I can't use the email address, right? I mean, that would have been, a very good way to match contacts.
It's a good primary key, foreign key relationship.
And since I don't have access to email addresses, I'm doing something really, really simple. And you can guess I'm just using the first name, last name.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, it seems like it's overly simplistic, but it works. And I mean, I'm sure you've used Outsync and
I haven't had any problems, but now you've got me wondering if one of these days, John Smith is going to call me and I'm going to see another guy's face. What if there are multiples? Do you deal with that?
I just use the first match.
Sorry, I didn't mean to out your bugs in this interview. But it's a very interesting question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and people have asked me variations of this, right? I mean, one is, can you create a new Outlook contact based on the Facebook contact? And the answer is, I could, but it wouldn't have a lot of useful information.
It would have a name and a picture.
It would have a name and picture and maybe, their hometown and, their, I guess a relationship status and things like that, which you wouldn't really find useful without an email address. On the flip side, and the other question I get asked is, well, I have people in Outlook. Well, I have people in both places, but in Outlook, the name is John L. Smith, and on Facebook it's John Smith. And how come it's not matching that?
That was my next question. What about middle initials?
Yeah, it doesn't match those, unfortunately.
Really?
So yeah, and I haven't really come up with a good solution for that. I mean, one solution might be that let the user manually match contacts and then store the Facebook ID and the Outlook ID somewhere in the registry or somewhere in like an e-file or somewhere like that.
That would be a really great feature.
Yeah.
And I think that there are those people who who care about their middle initial.
Yeah.
And it would be interesting to make a judgment call about whether or not it's more likely that their middle initial would appear in Facebook because that's the profile they created versus Outlook contacts, which is ultimately what you created.
Sure.
So if I met John Q. Smith, I don't care about the Q. I put John Smith in Outlook, but he does. He puts it in Facebook.
I see your point, Glenn, but it could go either way because Facebook doesn't ask you for a middle initial. They don't have a field for middle initial, but Outlook does. So when you're entering someone from a business card, for example, you would probably put in their middle initial when you're doing it yourself.
Yeah.
On Facebook, I rarely see people. I don't think I've ever seen someone with a middle initial on Facebook. Yeah.
Interesting.
So this was sort of like a Pride 2 feature for me.
Yeah. What did you just say? That's a Microsoftism.
A Pride 2.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a priority 2 thing.
Yeah. So Pride 2 is usually something which is a nice to have, and Pride 3s are usually, cut line stuff.
Okay. Which cut line. Okay. I'm sorry. I've only been at the company 7 weeks. I got to ask you for all the translations.
Yes, Scott. You stick around long enough, you'll start talking like the product groups. So this was something, I actually had the plumbing work for this underneath the surface. I just didn't have the UI, I just didn't have the time to create the UI for it, but it's definitely something I'm going to work on when I do.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really fun feature because, out of the 1,000 odd friends on Facebook and the 2,000 people in Outlook, I think I ended up like 398 or something like that. It would seem like a high number, but now I'm wondering, there may be another 100 people in there.
There most likely are. And Scott, I mean, you being a very well-known person, I mean, you have...
Well, I always thought that you were going to say gregarious, but...
Well, you do. I mean, most people that have used my app, have used it with maybe 250, 300 contacts. And with the data set that size, you don't really have a lot of dupes. But I guess with 2,000 people, I mean, there is a possibility that you have.
Well, you see, the dirty little secret about me, and this is just horrible, but now I'm saying it on tape, is that I know these people, I meet these people, I shake people's hands, I talk to people, and I have really interesting conversations with strangers at conferences. And I remember them. Here's the part that's horrible. I remember these conversations. I met a guy at Dev Connections. I literally just came off the plane. I mean, we're sitting here in my hotel in Seattle. I just came from Vegas, had like a 20-minute conversation with a guy. I remembered when I had met him before, TechEd 2003. Yeah. I knew what problem he had. I remember the code he showed me. I did not know this guy's name for the life of me. He's like, you probably don't remember me. And I was like, oh, ASP.NET 1.1, you had a problem with the forms authentication. Had no idea what his name was. Yeah. This kind of application that can show me someone's face. Yeah. It makes all the difference to put the name to the face. So,
yeah, totally. And in the first version that I did, I essentially just focused on getting the person's picture into your Windows mobile device. That was the biggest.
Yeah. So how does that happens automatically with the Active Sync?
So let me just finish my train of thought there.
Okay.
But in a future version, I mean, I could, bring down other information like their relationship status or their hometown or, some of the other stuff that people have on Facebook, mm-hmm. Such as their current status or, their current employer, which mm-hmm. is all of the above are fields that Facebook does expose in the API. Mm-hmm. So, maybe the next time you meet that guy, you've already got his information from Facebook. So you don't have to think about, if the person's still working in the same company or if he's married now, or if he's, moved around a little. That's definitely something we can sync with Outlook. Now, going back to your next question about Windows Mobile. What I do is I use the Outlook PIAs to insert these images into the Outlook contacts. And again, there's a very clean API for that. You can just open up, you can iterate the contacts in your Outlook folder, mm-hmm. and then for each contact there's a method. I think it's called set picture or set photo, and it takes the parameter is a local file path. So I just take that.
Wow, that's easy.
Yeah, I just take that temp file that I stored for their image, uh-huh. And then assign the photo, and I get back an error code if there is anything wrong with it.
Now, the image doesn't have to exist on disk. It gets sucked into Outlook world and then lives in your PST or lives in Exchange.
Yeah, and then I just get rid of the temp file, and then that image becomes gets stored internally as an attachment within Outlook itself. And then you can just delete the image from the disk.
I found this to be very useful because it doesn't only appear in Windows Mobile, but it also appears next to their name in Outlook. So when I'm emailing folks, I'm seeing their face as well.
Correct.
So people's faces are popping up all over.
Correct. And it even shows up in Outlook Web Access and within Windows Mobile, in the, if you have an ISV app, such as Pocket Informant, or there's, all sorts of, Outlook mobile replacements, they can leverage that image too. I mean, anyway, Windows Mobile has an API to iterate the contacts list, just like Outlook does on the desktop side.
It's just going to take up a lot of space. I didn't really think about this. I've got all 2,000 contacts on my device, and now I've got all 400 photos, but I haven't had any trouble. Did you make them smaller, or did they get smaller?
So I'm not making them smaller because the good news is when you sync those images, when Exchange syncs those images, there's some logic on the Exchange side that shrinks those images down to a size that's compatible with Windows Mobile. I think there's a limit. The images can only be 64 kilobytes, or I don't know what the number is, but there is a limit, and I know that because I've talked to the ActiveSync team about it.
Because I didn't think about it. And interestingly, my particular device, some people will use a USB cable to plug in and use ActiveSync. My mobile phone has never actually touched my computer. They do everything wirelessly. So all these photos came down over my data plan, it sounds like.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, each image isn't taking up some 300 or 400 kilobytes. I mean, it's taking up some amount of space, like, within 100 kilobytes, and it's reasonable. So yes, it takes some space, but it's not gonna.
Yeah, I haven't noticed any problem. And it hasn't slowed anything down, interestingly enough.
Yeah, I mean, the Pocket Outlook application, or the contacts application on your mobile phone, is designed to work with as many images as you have. So even if all your contacts had photos, it would still work. It can scale nicely.
Yeah, on the version of Windows Mobile that I'm running kind of an internal build. I've noticed, and I'm not sure if you can tell me whether this is like this in Windows Mobile 5, Windows Mobile 6. The phone will ring, it'll tell me the phone number, and it's working in the background to figure out the person's name. Yep. Then a fraction of a second later, the person's name will appear, and then a fraction of a second later, their photo appear. So none of these things are slowing the phone down because it's tapping in the background.
Yeah, and the same thing happens, in the internal version of Windows Mobile, which we can't talk about publicly right now. But you'll notice that the image is exposed in a lot of other places as well. So, for example, if you get a text message, it shows up in a really cool way in certain parts of the device, and it shows up with the image of the person. So once that image is on the device, it can be leveraged by a number of internal apps as well as ISV apps out there. Yeah,
a lot of people were giving me a hassle of taking back my iPhone. I bought an iPhone. I used it for 13 days. I took it back because I just didn't realize how much Exchange for me was my brain. Yeah. And then when I installed Outsync and started getting people's photos on my system, I didn't realize how pervasive it was because those photos would appear in Outlook Web Access. They'd appear in the phone would ring, there's my wife's face. Yeah. Those kinds of things I didn't count on.
Yeah, and I think that's a limitation of the iPhone not syncing natively with Exchange right now.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there's no reason why some third party can't write a sync provider which will take those photos and copy them to the iPhone as well, because those photos exist in your Exchange account or within your Outlook account, right?
So not to give you feature requests, but since I've got you here, I'm thinking of all the different other places where people's faces are that I might want to potentially get into Outlook, into Exchange. I've got about 350 Windows Messenger contacts. And a lot of those folks have faces. I'm thinking about other social networking sites. It seems like Outsync could potentially be a face collector. It could not only decide that you've got multiple John Smiths and have you map them, but you might be able to go and log into Plaxo, into LinkedIn, into Messenger, into Yahoo, and say, well, here are the three faces of Mel Sampat. Which one would you like to show up in your phone?
Yeah, that's a really, really good idea. And in fact, someone internally, a guy who works in the SharePoint team, told me the same thing, because so SharePoint has a social networking aspect of it, right?
It does, yeah. It's really neat at Microsoft, this whole My Sites concept that we have.
Yeah, so if you go to HTTP My within Microsoft, you look at this this page, built, which is about the user. You see his photo, you see his, the default is a photo that shows up on his badge. But you see all this other profile information about the person. So, so someone from the SharePoint team asked me if you could sync Facebook contacts with SharePoint. And there's a lot of cool things we can do, right? Like you said, Windows Live Contacts now has an API that you can sync with. And there, as long as there is an API, Outsync can potentially be used to talk to it.
That's interesting. You said that he said he wanted to sync Facebook with SharePoint. And interestingly, I keep thinking of Exchange as being that kind of, Outlook is my middle place. Like, for example, we have an internal thing called, Office Communicator. Of course, other people use Communicator in their enterprises if they have Exchange. And when you're logged into the corporate network, if I click on your name, at the bottom, I see your badge. I see a picture of you. So I've got a lot of Microsoft contacts. I would love you to have to suck those down and put them into Outlook. Those faces don't automatically appear in Outlook, do they?
No.
But they appear in Communicator.
They do.
See, you can make this happen. You can bridge the gap.
And it's really interesting, that once a platform, whether it's Facebook or whether it's SharePoint or Outlook or Exchange, once it has an API which exposes user information, there's just so many cool things you can do with it. And
it's a playground.
It's a playground, yeah. And it really makes a lot of these stodgy enterprise products into social networking playgrounds. So
this isn't the only Facebook application you have. We've been talking about desktop applications, and when you have the full power of the desktop, you can do a lot of stuff. But you also mentioned a little bit before about a web application. So you have a totally separate application that runs in Facebook. Yeah.
So just to put it in perspective, most people that use Facebook probably have seen traditional web-based applications, which fit right into their profiles. And desktop applications are kind of rare. You don't see a lot of apps that people have to download and use.
Yours is actually the only one I've ever used.
So Outsync is one good example of something you do with a desktop app. But I have this other app which is more like, one of those zombie apps or one of those, Flickr.
When you say people who aren't using Facebook won't know what a zombie application is. One of the things that's interesting about Facebook is that the applications are viral. And this can be a good thing and a bad thing. They are viral only to the level of viralness you give them. So, for example, an application might be favorite movies. So you install the little application and it appears as a square somewhere in your profile, just like a portal. It's like picking a web part in SharePoint, but it's in a Facebook particular way. And then I might go and say, here are my different movies. And then the application can choose to say, well, you really ought to tell your friends about this. Since I have access to your friends list, check these boxes and I will send an invitation for them to install this application. And this has allowed really geometric or exponential even growth of these applications where a good app spreads. Unfortunately, though, and this is just an opinion, there are these things called vampire and zombie. These are games, basically, where you've been bitten by Mel, and then I have to install the application and I can go bite other people. And it's a fun, quote-unquote, virus.
Well, it's fun until your manager's manager, which is essentially my general manager, sends me this. I get this email saying that, so-and-so has bitten you. And this guy is my Uber manager. And
your Uber manager?
My Uber manager. and I'm sitting there thinking, well, okay, so.
Steve Ballmer has bitten you.
Yeah. Steve Ballmer has bitten you on Facebook. Would you like to bite back? And here I'm thinking, well, what does that do for my career? If I bite my manager back or if I don't bite him, am I supposed to?
Well, and then the other question is that how high, does this manager know what he's done, right? Has he installed something he shouldn't have installed? I always worry about to try to save them from themselves.
It's so interesting because everyone at Microsoft is on Facebook now, right?
Really?
And, there's just every day, some new person I worked with is on Facebook and adds me as a friend. Right?
Yeah, I get a bunch every day.
And it's not surprising that, that upper management is on Facebook too. And you got to be really careful with what you post on there. Some people have their political views or they have, things like, you just have all sorts of personal stuff, which you don't want to, actually have your management, maybe, your coworkers.
These are public things. Facebook profiles show up on Google and Facebook profiles can be found.
Yeah. It's another interesting thing that happened was I was actually in San Francisco last weekend visiting a friend who moved from Microsoft to Google. Mm-hmm. And I posted an update on my Facebook saying, I'm doing a tour of Google. And when I came back to Redmond, my manager pulled me into his office and said, "Hey, Mel, are you happy with your job? Is there anything you need to tell me?" I'm like, "Sure. What are you talking about? I'm happy." It's like, well, apparently, there was a rumor about you, being at Google, and is there anything we need to talk about?
Because you stopped by.
Yeah.
You live in the public life if you're on Facebook.
If you're on Facebook, yeah. So I have this other app called I Love My Phone, and Scott, maybe you can post a link to this
sure.
when you post the
We'll
podcast.
put this on the show notes.
Which, again, it's related, since I work in the Windows Mobile team, it's related to phones. And what it does is, people want to show off their movies on Facebook or their favorite recipes or, their favorite artists. Well, I'm proud of the phone I use, right? I mean, I love, we have
the same phone. I'm looking at your phone. It looks like a T-Mobile Dash.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great phone.
So I'd like to go on Facebook and show the world, hey, this is the phone I use. And similar, people have similar opinions about the iPhone or, anything cool that you use, whether it's a BlackBerry or iPhone or Windows Mobile phone.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this website where I host, a database with a list of the top 100 phones.
Okay.
From Amazon's list, right? And I'll let people select a phone from there, from the database, and they say, okay, this is the phone I use, and it shows up as a little box on their profile saying,
the picture pulled from Amazon.
With a picture pulled from Amazon. I'm just calling Amazon's web service
to
to show a picture there, and it's really tying together Amazon's web service with ASP.NET on the website, and Facebook's. Again, it's using Facebook's framework that Microsoft developed.
So how do you keep your application from being, your servers from being crushed by this huge amount of Facebook traffic as more and more and more people install your applications?
That's a great question, Scott. So, it might seem like every time you look at a person's profile, every single application that the user has on their profile is actually being loaded from the application developer's website, but that's not really the case. What happens is only when you want to configure an application, such as for your Flickster movies app, when you want to select your favorite movies, or in my case, when you want to select your favorite phone, that's when the developer's website comes into the picture. So the developer's website is hosted within an iframe. You can, so Facebook gives you a session, and as a developer, you can use that session to configure the user's profile and insert certain HTML within the user's profile. And that HTML that you as a developer give to Facebook gets cached.
So just the contents of the iframe, just that moment in time, that stays there.
Yeah. So for example, if within my app specifically, right, when the user says he wants to select a favorite phone, I load this iframe, which shows a couple of drop-down boxes, where the user can select his phone, his carrier, his manufacturer.
And this is all live, really hitting your actual machine.
Correct.
Okay.
But this is not something a user would want to do every single day. Just like a user wouldn't want to change his favorite movies every day, he wouldn't want to change this. He wouldn't want to go into configuring the app every single day, right? Okay. So he does it once, he presses submit, and then my app generates a chunk of HTML. Well, technically, it's not HTML; it's FBML, which is a special markup language for.
Because we needed another markup language.
Well, it's a markup language that ensures that the HTML is consistent with Facebook's design guidelines. So Facebook has done a really good job of making their own markup language, which supports a few HTML tags, but essentially it's got special tags like title and subtitle, and
because that was my next question was going to be, what about CSS, and how does it all look the same?
Yes, so you have to use FBML to show content within the user's profile.
So theoretically, I mean, I'm extrapolating and guessing here, but if they decided to change their whole site thematically, they would change their FPML, back end, and the whole site, everyone would look the same.
Yeah. So as a developer, you're not allowed to use CSS within the content that's shown on the profile page. You can do whatever you want in the iframe, which is the configuration page, and the Facebook doesn't care if that looks completely different than their profile page. But they want to ensure that the profile page itself looks very consistent. And that really, you might have heard about, people say that Facebook is a lot more professional looking than MySpace, for example.
It kind of is.
Yeah, and this is a reason why, because developers cannot just put random HTML on the profile page.
Oh, and from a security perspective as well, I would think.
Yeah, and so from a security perspective, it prevents things like phishing attacks, because you can't just insert an image. You know how people insert like a 0 pixel image,
right,
which can call scripts on another server. You can't do things like that because Facebook caches that image as well as the FBML.
See, that was my next question. So you've got a picture, you've got 100 different pictures. Are they hitting Amazon, or are they hitting
They only hit Amazon when you're configuring the app. But when you create the FBML, which you give to Facebook, Facebook takes all the images it references and it caches them and it puts them on its own servers. So, it serves a lot of purposes, right? One is obviously we talked about, which is consistency in the UI. You can't just create your own CSS tags, or you can't, make text larger than it should be. Facebook can control the look and feel. Mm-hmm. The second is Facebook can guarantee that the profile page is always going to be available, regardless of the spikes in bandwidth, or if an application suddenly becomes more popular than the developer expected. Facebook can scale its servers, right? Because they have more bandwidth, conceivably more bandwidth than a third-party developer. So
yeah, that's very clever. That seems it's kind of obvious, of course, once you have thought about it. But how else would they do it? There's lots of companies like Yahoo that have been having trouble with widgets and stuff.
Correct. But the first time you start writing a Facebook application, you may not realize that this is the way it works, and you may, you just need to know that this is the architecture. And it took me, a few hours to realize that I couldn't update what's on the profile in real time because that's cached, right? So, for example, I couldn't show the weather over there, because that information is cached, and it can't just call a script to update itself automatically. You have to put in, you had to go through some extra hoops to get that information to be updated.
So how did you render the FBML? Is this response.write tags, or did you just write this into your ASPX page with a certain MIME type?
No, it's not a MIME type. It's actually easier than you would think. I'm just using a string builder to
you heard it here, folks.
So I'm using a string builder class to create.
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science, no. And Facebook has this tool. I think it's called the FBML test emulator, where you can type in your FBML and it shows you what it would look like on the Facebook's profile. On a Facebook profile. So I typed in all my FBML, my placeholder FBML. I made sure it looks and feels the way I want it to. And then I just copy and pasted it into my Visual Studio, into my C# code. And I just, replace the placeholder text with what the actual variable should be.
Cool. Well, so we'll put some links up to Outsync, to
I Love My Phone.
I Love My Phone. And everyone who listens to Hanselman should now become your friend on Facebook. So I want to see a crush of add friends to Mel, so he can at least decline you because he doesn't know who you are.
So again, I just want to stress that, writing Facebook apps can be very addictive, and you can, if you're a developer that's used .NET code, it's really, really easy, and you can do a desktop applications, just Outsync, or you can write web applications, which is more common these days. And once you write your first Facebook app, you have a framework in place that you can just use to create another app and more and more and more apps. And, Facebook is, as most of you know, Facebook is the first, social networking site that has an open platform and APIs and stuff. So, you should definitely go and leverage that.
Cool. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. And this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes. We will see you next week.
Great. Thanks, Scott.